Story 1. The disappearance of Cherry Mahan occurred when she got off her school bus 50 feet from her house and was never seen again. Recently, a woman came forward claiming to be her, but it was proven not to be true. Story 2. I would really like to know what happened to Judy Smith. She went missing while on vacation in Philadelphia, and her body was found months later in North Carolina. I also wish we knew where all of the art is that was stolen from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. Story 3. The lead masks case is pretty weird. Two young radio technicians from Rio de Janeiro were found dead on a hillside one summer day. They were dressed in business suits and raincoats despite the hot August weather, and they were both wearing eye masks cut from sheets of lead. There was a small notebook near them with the instructions. 1630B at the specified location. 1830 ingest capsules. After the effect, protect metals await signal mask. Nobody seems to know what that means or why the men did what they did. Story 4. Originally, it was the boy in the box. They have since discovered his identity, Joseph Augustus Zarelli, but I would still be interested to know who killed him and why. I also think about the case of Selena Mays, who just straight up disappeared from the Philadelphia area on the New Jersey side when I was a little girl. She was 12 years old and 9 months pregnant. Story 5. In New Zealand, a young girl was murdered 2 streets away from where I now live. It was 1976. Her name was Tracy and Patient. She is always in my thoughts when I pass her street. Her murder is still unsolved. Story 6. Andrew Paul Gosden, born July 10, 1993, disappeared from central London on September 14, 2007, when he was 14. On that day, Gosden left his home in Doncaster, South Yorkshire, withdrew £200 from his bank account, and bought a one-way ticket to London from Doncaster Station. He was last seen on closed-circuit television leaving King's Cross Station. Despite numerous national appeals for information in the years following his disappearance, Gosden's reason for traveling to London that day and his subsequent fate have not been established. In December 2021, detectives investigating the case arrested 2 men on suspicion of kidnapping and human trafficking in relation to Gosden's disappearance. Both men were released under investigation while inquiries continued. In September 2023, police confirmed that the men had been eliminated from the investigation. They are believed to be the first arrests made in connection with Gosden's disappearance. There is even a whole subreddit dedicated to theories about his disappearance. People tend to think he was groomed online, lured to London, and killed. Very sad. There is a closed-circuit television image of him at the King's Cross Station. Seems so haunting to look at now. Story 7. Bryce Laspiza went missing after an hours-long ordeal in which he was frequently in contact with his parents via phone, but made little progress toward his destination without any particular justification. His parents even asked a local person to help him get onto the highway, which he did, but Bryce continued to make no meaningful progress. He never made it home, and his vehicle was eventually found, having experienced some kind of accident. Some blood was present, but not a huge amount. The car was near a body of water. He was not in the vehicle and has never been located. Evidence suggests to me that he was having some kind of mental health episode or possibly issues with drugs impacting decision-making. Maybe he was dissociating during the trip and eventually died by suicide in a way that made him hard to find or tried to disappear into society. But he's such a distinctive-looking guy that it's really hard to believe no one would have seen him. This case just drives me nuts because he really went missing while everyone was actively trying to keep tabs on him and even speaking to him intermittently. It doesn't feel like a situation that should have loose ends. Story 8. The Dardine family homicides have left me horrified for years since initially learning about them. In 1987, a family of 3, soon to be 4, was living in Ina, Illinois. Keith, Elaine, who was heavily pregnant at the time, and their young son Peter were part of this family. More than 10 murders had been committed in the 2 years before the family's deaths. Keith was actively looking to move his family to a safer area. Unfortunately, they never got the chance. One night, an intruder entered their house and brutally attacked Elaine, causing her to go into labor. The perpetrator then beat the newborn girl, who was to be named Casey, to death. Peter was also beaten to death. The beatings were carried out with a baseball bat that little Peter had received as a present earlier in the year. The killer then laid all three of them together in a bed. Keith was taken from the scene alive in his own vehicle, which was later found at a police station. He was found the next day, dead in a field, shot 3 times with his body mutilated. Story 9. JonBenet Ramsey. They have DNA, but it seems a mystery as to why they haven't done a familial search to find the killer. You would think a child killer would be a priority. Story 10. Alexandra Wywerchuk, a young nurse in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada, went for a walk one spring night in 1962 and never came home. 2 weeks later, her body was found in a shallow grave by the river that runs through the city, mere blocks from her home. Still unsolved to this day, the police are still looking for witnesses despite finding DNA after an exhumation. I became fascinated when I discovered her next-door neighbor, across the alley on the next block, was a guy named Sanford Clark, whose story is a rabbit hole on its own. Story 11. Sneha and Phillips. A woman goes missing about the same time September 11th attacks happen. She lived just 2 blocks away from the towers, so she probably died, right? Well, it didn't take long for investigators to uncover some shady things about her. Apparently, she had been living a double life. She was going to questionable lesbian bars and going home with women. She also had a bit of a drinking problem. Her husband and her family vehemently deny this, though. Her husband says she was going to lesbian bars with women because she was sexually assaulted by a coworker at a bar and didn't feel comfortable around men. I'll let you decide if he's telling the truth or not. Another thing of note, she was seen on closed-circuit television at a mall with a still unidentified woman. They were shopping together, and she bought a pair of lingerie. Her credit card history backs this up. There was extremely poor security camera footage of a woman kind of matching her description in the lobby of her building at the time the tower was hit. She suddenly takes off at a certain point. However, it's never been confirmed if this is her or not. So what happened to her? Did she run away with a lover for a life with less involvement for men? Was she killed in the September 11th attacks? Did something more sinister happen to her? Who was the woman she was seen with on closed-circuit television footage the day she disappeared? Is her family lying or are the police? Was she the woman in the lobby footage? Story 12. The Setagaya family murder. The whole family was murdered in a shocking way, and the killer even stayed at their house. No one knows who did it. The house still sits alone with all their belongings still inside. All the houses nearby have been torn down, although this was already happening by the time of the murders. Story 13. Susan Powell's disappearance. Obviously, her husband did it. But how? Why? Where is her body? Every person who might know anything is dead now, so we'll probably never know. Story 14. I have one that is personal. My great-grandfather was murdered in 1925. It was never solved. It is a pretty crazy case involving conspiracy, rumors, blackmail, and, of course, murder. If anyone is interested in reading about it. Story 15. There are 2 cases that hold my attention. 1. The identity of the middle child in the Allenstown 4, from the Bear Brook case. All 4 were victims of serial killer Terry Petter Rasmussen. He murdered them and left their remains in 2 50-gallon steel barrels in Bear Brook State Park in New Hampshire. 3 of the victims were identified. Mother Marlies Honeychurch and her 2 daughters, Marie Vaughn and Sarah McWatters. But there was one more victim buried with them, a girl between Marie and Sarah in age. DNA analysis showed that this middle girl was the daughter of Rasmussen himself, but beyond that, her identity is completely lost. It would be a poignant thing for her to get her name and identity back. What happened to the Lateran wives in the 12th century? In the 1100s, the Catholic Church convened several synods or ecclesiastical councils to hash out matters of canon law and rules for clergy. Among the topics covered by the First and Second Councils, held in 1123 and 1139 CE, respectively, were some pretty strict rules on clerical marriage and concubinage. These councils established that clerics were not allowed to marry or live with women to whom they were unrelated by blood. They also declared all such relationships invalid, with any children from such relationships considered illegitimate. and ordered all clerics to put away their wives or suffer excommunication. Presumably, some married clergy might have given up their career in the church to stay with their wives or partners. But not all of them would have. So what happened to the Lateran wives? What was their fate? How many of them joined the clergy themselves or had to go live with relatives, or were disenfranchised entirely and had to support themselves somehow? How many children were left without their fathers, with the stigma of illegitimacy? Were any flat out murdered by their clerical exes? We simply don't know. The fate of the women affected by the Lateran mandates was never recorded, as far as we know. It remains a mystery to this day. Story 16. My mind always goes back to Brandon Swanson. 19-year-old Brandon Swanson drove his car into a ditch on his way home from a party on May 14, 2008. He called his parents and told them he was okay, but asked if they would come pick him up. After looking for a bit, his parents couldn't locate him, so Brandon said he could see the lights of a nearby town and he would start walking in that direction. He stayed on the phone with his parents as he made his way. He was cutting through a field when his parents suddenly heard Brandon say, "Oh no," and then the call went silent. Although his car was found, Brandon and his personal belongings were never discovered. Story 17. Amber Takaro, in Nisku, Alberta, Canada. The police released some audio that definitely sounds like her talking to her killer while he is driving her to the killing site. Pretty tough to hear. I used to work up there in the oil field when she went missing, and there was basically nothing about her at the time. Stumbled onto the story later in life, and it always kind of bothered me. I could have been driving the road she was on at the time and probably drove around the site in the same time period. Story 18. How do we really not know who planted the pipe bombs by the Democratic National Committee and Republican National Committee on January 6th? People love to say it was Marjorie Taylor Greene, but that just feels like reality has jumped the shark. Story 19. World War II women Air Force service pilots, WASP, pilot Gertrude Tommy Tompkins took off from Los Angeles in a brand new P-51 Mustang fighter and vanished. She was supposed to ferry it across the country, but she never arrived at her first stop. Story 20. The disappearance of Representative Hale Boggs and Representative Nick Begich. They disappeared in a plane over Alaska, but their bodies have never been recovered. The podcast Missing in Alaska covered this mystery but never came up with any solid conclusions. Story 21. The 2003 disappearance of Maura Murray in New Hampshire. A University of Massachusetts nursing student who drove to the White Mountains for unknown reasons had a minor car accident on a rural road and was never seen again. Story 22. The Yuba County Five, essentially 5 men, were coming back from a basketball game and were found dead about 100 miles off route on the top of a mountain during a blizzard. As you look into it, the story gets weirder and weirder. Story 23. The disappearance of a 5-year-old girl named Dulce Maria Olives who went missing at a New Jersey park. I have been following the story ever since I got the Amber Alert that she went missing. Since then, her mother has done numerous televised interviews that have garnered a lot of attention, but there have been few to no leads. Story 24. Amy Lynn Bradley, who disappeared on a cruise with her parents and brother in Curacao. I learned about the case a few years ago and was aware of the sightings but cannot get over the fact she might still be alive, albeit being held against her will. Story 25. The disappearance of the Sodder children in 1945. A house fire, mysterious phone calls, and unexplainable clues. What really happened that Christmas Eve? Story 26. I feel like America has quite a lot of these that could be most fascinating, but nothing in England will beat the dominance Madeleine McCann continues to have on the media. Story 27. The disappearance of Jodi Huisentruit. She disappeared in the early morning hours of June 27, 1995, soon after telling a colleague that she had overslept and was running late for work. As there were signs of a struggle outside her apartment, Huisentruit is believed to have been abducted. However, extensive investigations failed to uncover any clues to her disappearance, and Huisentruit was declared legally dead in 2001. Story 28. I spent days and nights and more days and nights down the rabbit hole on the slaughter of David Crowley and his wife and daughter as he worked on a gray state. I check in from time to see if a better theory exists to explain the circumstances because I will never believe it was murder-suicide. Story 29. Eastern Airlines Flight 980 ended up off course and crashed into Mount Yamani in Ecuador on January 1, 1985. The cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder were never recovered as there was a lot of interference on different fronts with the investigation efforts. So the details and reason around the crash were never discovered. The general consensus from the aviation community is conspiracy to cover up illicit operations by the airline. Barely Sociable has a great video on it, and I'm reading a book written by a pilot and union representative for Eastern Airlines at the time that talks about the crash and some shady dealings within the airline that eventually led to its shutdown. Story 30. We have a case in our small town of this girl in the grade below me whose mom went missing. She left work one day, and a few hours later they found her car engulfed in flames 2 blocks from their house. But the mom was nowhere to be found. To this day, 17 years later, she still has no answers and there have been no leads. I feel for her so much, and I pray that she can get closure.